Hey, Psych 307 students. So today I'm going to go through my lit review as you guys are preparing to write yours. I'm going to go through mine and just explain kind of some of the details, some of the thought that went behind it, as well as just kind of the structure of mine, so it gives you a good idea for a template of how you can write yours in the future when you start writing those. And so, just a note: I wrote mine a few years ago, back with the 6th edition APA styling. So that'll be a little bit different. Just don't look at my APA like specifically for like running heads, because I think we don't have those anymore. And there's a few other things with regards to the title page which are done differently. But yeah, let's just jump into this. I should be about a 10-minute video. If I go a little bit longer, I'm just explaining stuff, and yeah, so this should be helpful. Cool. So my paper, I did mine on fighting anxiety and related disorders with meditation practices and mindfulness practices. I was really into that stuff, and I still am into it to this day. I remember getting into this idea actually when I started writing my paper. I wanted to do it on something different, and about 3 or 4 weeks into the semester, I had to change my topic because I wasn't clicking. I couldn't find the research I wanted to say what I wanted to say. So I ended up switching to this one. What I found with a lot of the literature was that there's a lot of medication used with anxiety, as well as other therapeutic practices like cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that. And from what I talked to Dr. Hill about, was he said that the lit review can also be introducing a solution, introducing a synthesis of ideas of stuff that already exists, and then kind of showing like with the research that your idea is good. And so that's what I did. I decided to include meditation as something that could be a credible way to treat anxiety. And so we'll jump into this here. I got my abstract, and I'm not going to read through the whole paper. I'm just going to go through certain parts of it that I think are good. And as you'll be writing your abstract soon. As you can see, it's pretty small. It's just a few sentences, but basically it helps give kind of a background and a summary of your paper in one of the first pages. And so as you can see, I talk about just the background of people with anxiety, um, and how the symptoms they're more susceptible to other things as well, other disorders. And then I talk about the current prevalence of disorders, and there's medicinal therapy-based treatments there alone are insufficient to solve the problem. I kind of give my thesis in a little bit, and I include some keywords, which people will see a lot throughout the paper. Now jumping into it. So so here it is right here. I start out with a nice hook. In recent years, the United States has been taken hostage by anxiety. Start with first sentences, I think it's so important to catch the intention of the reader. Like right here, I use some pretty dramatic language. We're taken hostage by anxiety, which in a way, with 20%, nearly 20% of adults being diagnosed with a diagnosable anxiety disorder, that is pretty significant. And so after saying something like that, I back it up with some statistics that I get from the National Institute of Mental Health. And the introduction is, and you'll probably be writing this, it's to give background on what is going on in the world with your paper. So I talk about what anxiety and how it's a problem in the first paragraph. I say millions of people are suffering from anxiety and they don't have the tools to fight it, because I say that only 63% of people didn't even receive treatment, just kind of stating statistics and things like that. And then in the second paragraph, I go into discussing how people have sought to combat the symptoms of anxiety through different treatments. I introduce different treatments very broadly, not very generally, not too specific, because I'll go into those in the paper. And I talk about how ancient treatments, I give a little insight into that. Modern times, talk about medication and therapy, psychological and physiological symptoms, all that good stuff there. So there's the background on the medicine. So I've got the two parts. I've got anxiety, I've got the background on the treatment. And then I talk about what my review is going to talk about. I say, in addition to scientific approaches to relieving anxiety, there are alternatives like mindfulness practices that yield surprisingly helpful results. This review will focus on the practice of mindfulness, which is a state of heightened awareness of individuals' present thoughts or sensations, and I include citation from a book. They become more mindful by engaging in activities that shift their attention to the present moment. I kind of describe what mindfulness is, because I'll be talking about it a lot in the book. And then my thesis is, given this apparent relationship, mindfulness may be valuable, and so that's the language there. I'm not including causal language, notice it, or absolute language, may be a valuable addition to medicinal and therapeutic anxiety treatments because of its tendency to foster greater emotional regulation in the individual. That's important, which mitigate. So I'm focusing on the greater emotional regulation of the individual, which mitigates other symptoms. And so then I go into my first level 1, right? So the level 1 is more broad, and I'm going to the level 1 about anxiety disorders and common overview of them. And so you can see I talk about those. A level 2 is based off of something in the level 1. It goes into more detail in explaining it. So for example, I talk about some of the symptoms of anxiety right here, right? Severity of the blah, blah, blah. And then level 2, I go a little bit more into detail into the common anxiety symptoms for a few paragraphs. So it's kind of like an umbrella effect. You have level 1, which is very broad, and then it's actually, I think it's an upside down one, right? Yeah. And it goes more narrow into the topic as you go into the different levels. So there's level 1, distinguished by the formatting there. And if it's wrong because of the changes in the 6th edition or 7th edition, I'm sorry. Yeah, so basically it goes into that at level 2, and then I go into another level 1 after I'm done talking about the overview of anxiety disorders. I go into an overview of the anxiety disorder treatments as another level 1. This one's a little shorter. And then I jump into a level 2 again, specifically going into talking about pharmacological and therapeutic treatments. Specifically, still giving the basis, the background for my paper, talking about serotonin inhibitor and transfers and stuff like that. Serotonin inhibitors, reuptake inhibitors, citing as well. And then there's my level 2. And then I do a level 3, which is another, it goes into more detail. Level 3 is usually a case study or a specific example based on the level 2 of what it's been said. So in this one, I talk about generally what these different types of medications and treatments are, CBT, medication, and then I go into the consequences of one of those things, medication. And I talk about overdependence and substance abuse. Furthermore, in many cases, it'd be prudent to utilize medication to treat anxiety. It's very successful, but I also talk about that. The discussion is where I start introducing mindfulness practices. So discussion is the mindfulness practices, and there's my level 1. I talk about I introduce mindfulness practices right here, and then I go into a level 2 in which I talk about something that I mentioned in here, which was just I think I talk about awareness of self, and then I go a little bit into more of the emotional control related to that, so meditation specifically, because mindfulness meditation was mentioned in this one. So that's my level 2 into meditation, talking about that, giving bigger background into emotional regulation. And then I go into an example, meditation and college student anxiety regulation. There's my level 3 for that one. I'm sure that there's a rubric, and Dr. Hill has talked about the criteria for how many levels you have to have. If you want a specific number on how many are for this iteration of the literature review, go ahead and reach out to me if you have any questions about that. Eventually, you'll learn as you get into that stuff. But yeah, so there's my level 3, and then another level 2 to finish things up. And so I just kind of sum things up with this level 2. So yeah, and then I have my references. I have quite a few references. Here. I know that I think it's required you have, I don't know, don't take my word for it, 10 or something like that, or maybe 20. I think I had 30. And the thing with me and with references is, as you can see when you read my paper, I am citing things. If I state something, I'm citing it. I'm citing something. And notice that a lot of times I'm not even using direct quotes. I'm just using whatever. I want to make sure that I back everything that I say if I say something that is not common knowledge, or if I learned it from something. For example, I mentioned ancient treatment techniques were dangerous and effective. They center on the idea of altering the body and the mind as a coping. So I learned that from someone. I got to cite it, and it might be that after every sentence I have I have something that I've cited. But that just increases the credibility because I'm not just saying stuff, I'm not just saying what I think. I'm saying what Bishop et al. Thinks, focus on mindfulness, state of heightened awareness of individual I'm creating a synthesis of all these ideas, There's one example where I use a quote right there. Specific quote, got to include the page number for that one, for example. But yeah, so I'm really big into including a lot of sources, because your paper becomes more credible the more sources that you have, which is super important. Let's see. I think that yeah. Let's look into my mindful solution. Yeah. So a lot of you might be thinking, like, what will be the topic of my paper? What will I focus on? The way that I think about it, and I think I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, is the synthesis of ideas. You can create your own treatment method as long as you find research that supports the different facets of your treatment method. Like mine is anxiety, and so I support that by saying, all these people that I'm citing, they have something to say about my topic and about what I'm saying here. And so that's what I think is super important with finding sources. And your paper might not be as long as mine. Mine was pretty lengthy. I think that they've shortened it a little bit more. I'm not super sure though. Yeah, I hope that this gives you a little bit of a background into just what a literature review looks like, and how it's structured with the different levels. Basically, it starts out kind of broad and then narrows down with each set of levels that you do. Level 1, very broad. Level 2 goes into some of the concepts that are dealt with in or addressed in level 1. Level 3 is commonly examples and stuff like that. So I'm going to jump back to where I'm recording this thing, and I'm going to pause and stop the recording. Thanks for coming today.